Welcome to the Week 4 SCPI Boys Basketball Podcast. Connor Morissette alongside Keith DeMolder coming to you on a Wednesday afternoon. From here on out, we'll release these on Mondays, but another midweek one comes your way. So, Keith, looking at the past 9-10 days, it's been some great city section hoops. Monday night, Venice nearly beats University, but Dyson Hughes goes off for 40 points, and he's able to help University get the win. Last week, we saw some classics as well. I was at Birmingham against Taft. You took in that great game, George Washington Prep beating Gardena. So we've been all over the place. We're updated. We're ready to bring you our top 10. Just some thoughts as we head into this podcast.
Well, I love all the league play that's going on right now, just seeing these teams start to differentiate themselves from the others. Obviously, you saw George Washington Prep with a great win over Gardena, but then they lost to Taft. We see Taft really starting to cement itself as one of the top teams in the section, and really excited for this week because there's a lot of great games going on.
Absolutely. Into the top 10 we go. Couple honorable mentions. Fremont, Gardena, and George Washington Prep fall just short out of the top 10 this week. But at 10, making their debut in our poll, it's the Dorsey Dons, first team who's under 500 this week, and the only team who's under 500 to make it, but they've had some quality wins. They lost to Brentwood last week, which is a very good team, but they beat Locke and Oaks Christian, so that's incredible, beating Oaks Christian, a good Southern Section team. Allie Betts is a great senior leader for them, and then they have three terrific freshmen, Jalen Carter, Damian McDowell, and Reese Dixon. Tough week for the Dons, though. View Park and Crenshaw Friday, a huge rivalry game.
Yes, absolutely. And, Dorsey, looking at the resume, they don't bring as much as some of these other teams in the top 10, but I will say their 91-68 win over Fremont was probably their most quality win because Fremont's also a very good team. But looking at their roster, they may not have necessarily the biggest of wins, but their roster is pretty loaded in terms of their size. Out of their 10 players, they have 8 that are 6'3" or taller, and their big man, Drew Ron Williams-Baker, 6'7", 220, so he's a big kid. They have a lot of size, that Dorsey team does. And looking over, next year they're going to be loaded because they have those freshmen. Not a lot of sophomores or juniors on their team. It's either seniors or freshmen. But overall, that Dorsey team, very dangerous, especially if they can beat View Park and especially if they can beat Crenshaw.
You mentioned View Park. They're number 9 on our list. Small school in the top 10 this week. They beat Hawkins on Monday. Manual Arts and Fremont last week. They play at Dorsey and against San Bernardino this week. View Park, why are they 9, you ask? Because they beat Fremont as well as Dorsey. So a lot of fringe teams, the Gardenas, the George Washington Preps, but View Park and Dorsey, I think out of those fringe top 10 teams kind of have the best resumes right now, and that's why we've put them there.
Yeah, View Park especially because they have those wins within their own league. Obviously, they haven't beat Crenshaw yet. They could, though. Who knows? This week anything can happen, really. But that said, beating Fremont, beating Dorsey is the key for them. But they have 7 players right now standing above 6'3", just like Dorsey, so they bring the size as well. You just got to wonder, are the bigs going to be complementing the guard play? You got to make sure that those two are kind of intertwined, and if they can do that, I think they'll be a playoff contender.
At 8, Crenshaw. They killed Locke and Hawkins last week. Shedrick Lockridge, 19 points against Locke. The bigs were the story of the game, Keith. I know you were there. You can give us more of a detailed scouting report in a second. Big rivalry game for Crenshaw, though, this week against Dorsey on Friday. We'll pick that one in a little bit, but what do you see from Crenshaw this past week?
Well, watching that Locke game, obviously Locke, it's a team that only has 7 players that actually suited up for that game, so not necessarily the biggest of opponents, but certainly their bigs play very dominant defense, and also on the offensive glass, they were huge, and they got some big players. So Steven and Kevin Abirkwe, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and then also Success Chuke Wemeka. So if I pronounce those incorrectly, I apologize. But those guys, 6'6" and above, and they're all fantastic players, both offensively and defensively. In Crenshaw, they can certainly take advantage of some of these smaller lineups if they roll all 3 of them or just 2 of them. All of their bigs are certainly good, but their guard play, Isaiah Johnson, we saw him football season. Now he's a point guard. He has some great rebounding potential, also can distribute very well. But overall, looking, they lost to Narbonne, and they'll only play, Fremont, View Park, and Dorsey in league. So if they can continue to go undefeated in their league, I think the sky's the limit. But, having that loss against Narbonne really hurts.
Absolutely. That was a chance for them to get a marquee win, and they fell just short. But now they play Dorsey Friday, which isn't going to be a fantastic win for them if they pull it off. But it's a top 10 team, and really right now you can take what you can get. University 7, they beat Venice Monday night. LA High last week. We talked about it off the top. Dyson Hughes, huge 40-point game. You can check out those highlights on Twitter. Alex Scar posted them. They play Pally tonight and then Fairfax Friday, and that's kind of a statement game for them. They got beat pretty good when they played Fairfax last time.
Yeah, it seems, everybody thinks about University. They think about Dyson Hughes. Dyson Huge, might as well call him, because he is essentially that team scoring-wise, but you can't forget about these supplementary players.
Yeah, David Cheatham's great.
David Cheatham, 2.1 blocks per game, fantastic.
Scored the game-winning bucket against Venice. Had a great game.
And you think about him offensively and defensively, but you can't forget about the distributor. Rayshawn Crutcher, 4.4 assists per game, so they really have it all. Richard Wilson Jr., also, he can average double figures every single game for them. Their league schedule features two of the top teams in the section, that being Westchester and Fairfax. And I think for them, it's really just about competing and making sure to win those other league games and not, dropping a bad one at home or a bad one on the road to a team that really doesn't deserve to be in the top 10. And this University team certainly does deserve to be in there. It's just about how they're going to play come against Westchester and Fairfax.
At number 6, Narbonne, they beat Rancho Dominguez, Carson, and George Washington Prep last week. 6'9" forward Malik Muhammad, he had 22 points and 18 boards, looking like DeMarcus Cousins against Rancho Dominguez. So really, just a great performance from him. They play King Drew and San Pedro this week. They really shouldn't lose again. So people are a little frustrated with Narbonne being 6, and that has everything to do with them losing to El Camino Real, who looks like the weakest West Valley League team right now. They'll play Taft Friday, and if they win that, then who knows what's going to happen. But
right.
The fact that they lost to El Camino Real kind of pencils them into that 6th spot when El Camino Real beat Taft, and it's all going to work itself out. Narbonne's a great
Right.
team. I think they're firmly in the open division, but this week, for me personally, it didn't make sense to move them up when El Camino Real, Taft, and Birmingham have all beaten each other and all look very dangerous. I know El Camino Real had a tough loss to Birmingham, so maybe they're on the way down, and Narbonne will move up in the coming weeks, but they're 6 right now just because that West Valley League is so close together.
Yeah, it's really hard to differentiate between 5, 6, and 4. All these teams really have a right to be up there. For Narbonne, as you mentioned, Malik Muhammad, 6'9", huge kid. We talk about size early and often. Christian Coloco really making that Birmingham team what it is, and that they're so hard to beat. But looking at Narbonne, they have some great wins. George Washington Prep, Crenshaw, Gardena, and a very good Culver City squad featuring Tavion Jones. He's a 4-star, really good Culver City team. But that said, what I like from Narbonne is the fact that they do have a win over a non-league opponent, that being Crenshaw. And Crenshaw really hasn't lost that much this season. And so for Narbonne to say, yeah, we beat Crenshaw, we beat one of the top teams, it's really good on the resume. But the key for them, they have to close it out. They have to make sure to keep on winning, especially in league play.
Into the top 5, Taft. Great week for them last week, beating George Washington Prep, Birmingham, and Cleveland. 2 marquee wins right away with Prep and Birmingham. They're a 3-point shooting team, so when the shots are falling, they look great. When they're not, they don't. They play at Chatsworth this week. Should be an easy win for them. And then at El Camino Real on Friday. We'll pick that one in a little bit, but that game is going to have huge West Valley League implications.
Yes, and huge top 10 implications as well. It could really make things a lot more complicated, given the fact that El Camino came into Taft and beat Taft, a game that not many people expected El Camino Real to even compete in. And so I think that if Taft is able to kind of even the score, it'll make things a lot more complicated. But kind of just show, I think that Taft, looking at their resume overall, they have a lot better non-conference wins. And their ability to go into El Camino Real and say, that game earlier at our place, it was a fluke. We're really a better team than we did, than it's really showing on paper.
For El Camino Real, they beat Chatsworth. They lost to Birmingham last week, like we talked about earlier. So just a bad look for them, getting beaten at home by 25 against Birmingham. But they have a chance to right the ship against Taft on Friday. I think another loss is a cause for concern, because then they're kind of clearly that number 3 team in the West Valley League. And looking at the open division, it's going to be tough for the committee to take 3 teams from one league with Westchester, Fairfax, and University, and then take 3 from the West Valley League, Birmingham, Taft,
Right.
and El Camino Real. So something's going to have to give, and right now they might look like the weak team.
Yeah, they might be the team that's, going to bounce. But overall, looking at their roster, Eddie Egan, we talked about him on the previous podcast. He is fantastic, so lengthy, given that he's not necessarily the biggest of kids, but he certainly brings that size and physicality. But a guy we didn't mention on the earlier podcast, Makai Ben, huge 3-point scoring threat. He's also a big rebounder, very physical. We saw him in that game against Taft. He was huge, pouring in buckets, going to the line and making his free throws. That's so key for bigs down low, being able to draw fouls and then also make their free throws at the line. Obviously, when you get crushed by Birmingham at home, not the greatest of looks. I mean, they lost by 25. But that said, if they're able to beat Taft, I think they can sort of make a case for being that team into the Open Division.
Absolutely. Number 3, Birmingham. So they're 9-9, which might scare some people, but they beat El Camino Real 80-55, and then they lost at Taft 67-66 in overtime, a game they really should have won. Devonair Dutrieve had 28, but struggled with his shot in that game, had a chance to win it at the end, and ball rimmed out. So Birmingham, people say they're 9-9. Why the heck are they number 3? And for me, they're just one of the most talented teams in the city because of Devonair Dutrieve, who's the highest-rated prospect per ESPN in the LA City section, and then the junior transfer Christian Koloko from Cameroon, who's 6'11" and is a force down low, still kind of figuring out the game a little bit. But,
Right.
I mean, he's a 6'11" kid who has the ability to block, kind of anything in the paint, and on offense, he's good too. He makes his free throws, good fundamental player. So even though he's learning still, they have 2 of the top players in the city section, and to me that really is why they deserve to be number 3. And you look at what they've done since Koloko's been able to play in January. They've lost a really close one to Taft, but they crushed Granada Hills, who's a fringe team. Probably, I mean, if we did rankings to 15, they'd probably be there. They crushed El Camino Real. When this team gets it working, they're dangerous, and no one's going to want to play them in the Open Division.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about it, when this team is working. And so we saw against Taft, they took Taft to overtime. Taft, a very good ball club. And you said it yourself, the shot wasn't really falling for Dutrieve. But imagine in that situation when it is. Imagine when he's actually hitting his outside shots. The team is unstoppable. You talk about Koloko, you talk about Dutrieve. They're very good players, perhaps, top 2 players in the section. But then you look at these supplementary guys, and they have a great backcourt. They got great guys coming off the bench, providing that support even when Dutrieve and Koloko, they're not scoring as well as they should. So this team, it's really well rounded. I think not a lot of people give them credit for having a good bench.
Top 2, it's the same top 2 we've had all year. 2 Fairfax and then 1 Westchester. So Fairfax, they beat Hamilton Monday night. They play LA High and Pally this week, so it'll be easy for them. Robert McRae, Kirk Smith, Ethan Anderson, Ronald Mitchell, all were in double figures in that win against Hamilton. So deep. Play University Friday and then Bishop Montgomery Saturday, which is a really tough test. Bishop Montgomery, probably the best team in California. I think I'd be willing to make that leap. But University, Fairfax beat down on them the first time they played them. Now they get them at University. I still expect a Fairfax win, but, I mean, University, they've only lost 2 games to Westchester and Fairfax, and they'll want to get some revenge, so it might be a tougher game than people think.
Yeah, it'll certainly be close, but overall, Fairfax, they're just too deep. As you said, the ability for each starter to average double figure scoring is just fantastic. Kirk Smith, as we mentioned on the podcast earlier, 6'8", he's a big kid, great forward, just very fundamental in the way he plays the game. But that said, looking at their league schedule, if they're able to beat Westchester, I think that'll be the upset of the year, really, because Westchester is just that good. But Fairfax, they're not far behind. They got a lot of depth, especially on their bench. Overall, they had some great wins as well. They won over University, Long Beach Poly. They also have a win over Birmingham, which that'll be key come playoff time.
Number 1, Westchester, like I said, they lost to Bishop Montgomery on Saturday in a really tight game. They beat Venice earlier this week. Or last week, excuse me. Jordan Brinson, 16 points. Kalen Allen, 16 points against Bishop Montgomery. Just wasn't enough. Westchester, they beat Palisades Monday, and then they play Hamilton tonight and LA High on Friday. So another easy week for them. They look like the city section champions. They look like the Narbonne football of LA City section basketball. And, I mean, they're just that good.
Here's what I'll say. I think they're even better than Narbonne football, honestly, because Narbonne this year didn't really compete that well in non-conference, whereas Westchester did. Looking at their wins, they beat Santa Margarita, Narbonne, Long Beach Poly, St. Bernard, Chino Hills, Corona Centennial, Fairfax, and then they almost came close twice to Bishop Montgomery. So it just goes to show you that this team can compete with the big boys. They're the best team in the section, no doubt. Too much size, as we've mentioned in podcasts earlier. If Fairfax gets a win, that'll be the upset of the year.
That's probably a fair assessment. And taking that analogy a little further, Bishop Montgomery is probably the modern day of basketball, and the fact that Westchester played it so close with them, maybe Narbonne football wouldn't have been able to do that with modern day. So I hear you there. I think that's a fair analogy. Westchester won. I'm going to check them out tonight. Can't wait to see them play Hamilton. I know it probably won't be the closest of games, but just be cool to get there and see them in person. So now time for a game ball segment where we highlight some of the best players in the LA City section over the last few days and headed back to last week as well. Keith, who do you have this week?
All right, so my guy is from George Washington Prep, a huge win over Gardena at Gardena. Not an easy thing to do. Hanson Clark, you get the game ball from me. It just looks so good. His ability to hit the 3-shot outside, but also get key steals and buckets in transition. Really, that whole George Washington Prep team, their ability to force turnovers and then also make sure to make their shots on the other side. It was huge, but Hanson Clark, you get a game ball from me. Just step up defense and points all night long.
I have Malik Muhammad from Narbonne for my game ball, keeping it in the Marine League. 22 points, 18 boards against Rancho Dominguez over this past weekend. Again, I said it before, that's a ridiculous stat line. Anytime you can combine for 40 of anything, it's really impressive. So 22 points, 18 boards. Malik Muhammad, 6'9". Watch out, he is a very big-time player inside the post for Narbonne, and he's having a great year so far, and so are the Gauchos. So look out for them. Again, people are a little upset with their ranking, but I can see them moving up once the West Valley League kind of shifts a little bit. All right, let's make some picks. Got 4 games on the slate. We've only been picking 2 the last couple weeks, but we'll go with 4 this time. So Fairfax at University Friday night.
Gonna have to go with Fairfax. They already have a win over them, this season, and Fairfax, they just bring too much depth. They got a great front court. They're gonna have to go with Fairfax.
Yep, Fairfax a step above. I agree with you. Saturday, Fairfax against Bishop Montgomery at Cerritos College in a tournament.
Well, usually I would say, Bishop Montgomery by a little, but now that they have Gianni Hunt back after injury, I say Bishop Montgomery by a lot. Best team in California, hands down. They have a case to make the top 5 team in the whole nation, just with all the talent they have. Bishop Montgomery in a landslide, I think.
I think it might be closer, but I have Bishop Montgomery as well. Just, again, it's like Fairfax to University, Bishop Montgomery to Fairfax. It's a different level. Taft against El Camino Real on Friday at El Camino Real.
Oof, I'm going to have to go with, I'm going to go with El Camino Real. I'm going to have to say, they're at home. I think that they've been challenged, having that 25-point loss versus Birmingham, I think really kind of made that team angry. They were so hyped after that win over Taft. I think that they're going to host them. I think they're going to beat Taft.
I'm taking Taft. After El Camino Real beat them on their home floor, the Toreadors are angry. They're looking to, get some revenge against El Camino Real, and I think Taft just has the better roster, not by too much, but by a little bit. So even though they're on the road, I like them in that game. They're hot. They just beat Birmingham at home. Give me Taft. Last game, Dorsey against Crenshaw, Friday, the rivalry game. What do you like?
Ooh, gonna have to go with Crenshaw. I think that Dorsey, they do bring the size. Obviously, it's gonna be a heated atmosphere, Crenshaw Dorsey, but ultimately Crenshaw, they have too much on their resume, and I think that ultimately they're gonna win, and I think they're gonna win the Coliseum League easily.
Yeah, I'm taking the Shaw as well. It's not Dorsey's year this year, a little too young. Crenshaw look like an open division team right now, and Dorsey doesn't, so that's why I am taking Crenshaw. I think that one will probably be 10 to 15 points. I don't think it'll be too close. All right, so that's the Week 4 SCPI Basketball Podcast. Catch us at a game. Feel free to say hello. Would love to hear from you. I will be at Westchester tonight and then University Friday. Keith, you're all over the place, maybe at that tournament Saturday.
Yes.
So feel free to hit us up there, and have a great week. We'll be back Monday.